Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Thank you to you and the ranking member for having this hearing, and it's always pleasing to know that the VA is working hard to find better ways of doing more things to care for those who served our country. I want to raise a circumstance we find ourselves in Kansas, and this is a topic that I have raised with Mr. Missel, as well as a letter to the Secretary. But a tragedy has occurred in our state that involves the Leavenworth VA. And that tragedy is that a physician assistant is accused of sexually harassing and molesting veterans, particularly those with PTSD, and has been discharged has terminated his employment with the VA. But the facts now indicate that the knowledge of this person's history could have, or perhaps it was known. He indicated in his application for licensure in our state that he had past circumstances involving sexual crimes, and yet this individual still gets hired by the Department of Veterans Affairs. The reports continue to come in. Criminal prosecution is ongoing, and again, those are the circumstances we find ourselves in. But as we look at best practices, obviously having the best personnel in place is a requirement for us to implement best practices. And so I want to ask a set of questions that are related to the circumstance that we now have in our state. Again, it's outrageous that someone with a criminal record would be hired and put in a position to care for our veterans. We're uncertain as to how long this circumstance was known before the termination occurred. There was several investigations that apparently resulted in no termination. And while you're here to talk about improvements and best practices at the VA healthcare system, we obviously have some immediate circumstances that we need to take care of. And my question, my questions are these. What best practices to improve the vetting and hiring process, and what are the best practices that come in regard to background checks? Are there things afoot at the VA that would improve the circumstances that these kind of circumstances, this circumstance in particular, can't or wouldn't happen again?
So, Senator, first, we share your sense of outrage on behalf of the veterans you serve, and frankly, all veterans. And it is our responsibility to learn from this so that we can prevent anything that we could have done differently from happening in the future. That is a big priority for the group that I'm leading at VA. So I appreciate your comments very much. I think that you have stated very eloquently why credentialing of the providers that we hire is such an important function for us and frankly for any healthcare system. And we're striving for ways to improve that at all times, including, frankly, working with the Federation of State Medical Boards and so forth. You know, it used to be, because state licensing is a state authority, right, that someone might leave one state and it would be hard to get information. Well, this federated group makes information about prior incidents and reports much more easily available, and the people who do credentialing at VA are taking advantage of that opportunity. But we will certainly be most attentive to the specific responses you need around this incident, but it is something that we're always looking to improve.
What about best practices when it comes to a complaint being alleged, a concern raised? What about best practices in how you then treat that employee and his or her potential termination, or I guess I'll leave it at that. In this circumstance, termination and ultimate prosecution. Best practices in place once we know something has happened to terminate that person?
Certainly, we're going to do everything in our power to try to learn, again, if there's something that we could have and should have done differently in the past with respect to this individual employee. The phenomenal part of an integrated health system is, frankly, that we have the potential and, in fact, do share information about this system-wide, so that where we do make decisions that might have been done differently, we can share that system-wide, and you have my commitment that we will do that.
Dr. Clancy, I appreciate what you just said. I would tell you that I have had the sense over a period of time that it's seemingly too often when there's a problem with an employee, a healthcare provider within the VA, my impression, and you can convince me that I'm wrong, is the most likely outcome is that that professional is transferred to some other facility within the Department of Veterans Affairs. It seems to me that the likelihood of termination is minimized, and often an individual is transferred.
So having been personally involved with a couple of fairly senior clinicians in this circumstance, I can tell you that it was my highest priority to make sure that that did not happen. I can't speak to what has happened in the past, but that's not fair to veterans or to anyone else. And frankly, it is our responsibility to report to state licensing authorities, and in cases I've been involved with directly, we have made sure that we've done that. It is a lengthy process, both because of due process and frankly also making sure that we have enough evidence to uphold everything that goes forward, but that's what we need to do, period.
Doctor, I use this hearing as an opportunity to raise this issue
Yes.
for its importance. In this particular circumstance, justice needs to be had.
Absolutely.
Individual veterans need to be cared for as a result of this individual's actions, but also that this needs to come to an end. This should never be the circumstance we find ourselves in any VA facility across the country, and I would ask your commitment that we achieve that goal.
You have my full commitment to that.
Thank you, Doctor.
I want to thank Senator Moran for bringing up the subject, and I want to make a comment if I can. What you've just said is exactly the evidence that testifies to the fact that we've got to pass veterans first. You've got to be able to fire employees and make it stick. And there's certain crimes or certain practices or certain illegal activities for which there should be zero tolerance, period. Sexual predators is one of them. There's a recent series in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that's run for about 16 weeks on the number of physicians who've abused the patient relationship with the doctor and have been sexual predators. And even the boards of medical examiners in the states have returned their licenses to them rather than disciplining them. So I would just add this comment. We need to give the VA the ability to fire and make it stick, and that's why Veterans First is so important, number one. First at 434 level employees and then all the way down. Secondly, there ought to be a complete attitude of zero tolerance for certain things, and sexual abuse or sexual predators is one of them. And you shouldn't move them around somewhere else in the agency to get rid of them. You should get rid of them entirely, and so they can't ever come back in the agency again. And that's something I hope the VA will work on. I'm going to work on seeing to it Veterans First gets done so you can fire and make it stick. I want you to work on policies and practices that have a zero tolerance for those types of activities. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.